Hello, everyone. This is Jason Dean coming at you again for another Film Fanatic show. I've talked a lot about, other than the normal reviews that I do for this channel, where I talk about movies I love, new and old films, particularly around older films that really I find just incredibly enjoyable, but they're also like a real deep source of inspiration for me, if you want to call it artistically, but they're deep influence on the music I write with my band Quantum, and I just really love the hell out of these movies. So I usually focus on that most of the time, and I've been mixing things up with doing specialty shows where I do shows maybe on like specific directors. I did a show a couple of months ago where I just focused on Stanley Kubrick, and then I also did a show where I talked about like the nature of reviews and from critics to people who are on YouTube, and how negative reviews uh, can affect films in the box office, or positive reviews for that matter, how they seem to have almost a deeper impact now. And but my favorite thing to do is for this channel is doing this very thing here, is doing these interview segments. I've been trying to do more of these. We got probably about five or six of those shows that uh, that I've done in the past. So I've been doing more and more. So this is probably my favorite format and my favorite thing to do. So I have a great special guest, my buddy Spencer, amazingly talented electronic artist who we just recently met, or I just recently met, uh, just probably like probably August, I think, I
Yeah,
believe it was.
yeah.
And then we got a chance to play a couple of times together. We played a really great and super fun show at Ada's, and we're working on doing some more shows. And we been talking about music, and he mentioned a few weeks ago that he also has a love for film, and that is a big thing that kind of inspires him. So that spawned this idea of having him on the show. So, ladies and gentlemen, Spencer.
Hey guys, appreciate it, Jason, for having me on.
Oh yeah,
This will
my
be fun.
pleasure. So your group the name that you go under is Method for Madness,
Yep.
right? And that's all like modular craziness. And I remember we talked about that in the beginning, like when we first started talking online, and then we met, and then we did the show, our first show together, and you did like an improvised set more or less, and it was great because none of us had really ever heard each other's music, and we all like it was kind of our first time meeting, and we just had a plan of how to try to do it, of like not trying to work with the spillover from the dinner crowd to where they might leave at some point, and then how to finish out the night. And we also had my buddy Halsey, who does a lot of great electronic music, kind of in the vein of like a Thundercat, has like a hip hop kind of vibe,
Mm.
very kind of modern sound. So we tried to figure out a way of how to do it, and then so Spencer, we worked it out, and then you ended up opening up the night, and you had to deal, well, fortunately or unfortunately, with more of the dinner crowd aspect, but you like totally kicked ass in that vibe of kind of reading the crowd, and creating a cool vibe. And I remember it was so funny because when you started, there was this big giant table of some older folks, and they were like right in front of you, and you could have just just blew the blew them away, and just like, but I remember they were actually like totally digging what was going on, and they stayed for most of the night and for that set definitely. And but I noticed that they were kind of digging, and you were like so great about reading the crowd, and kind of just and then elevating the energy and building up the intensity slowly. And it was that was really awesome. And I remember my first impression, because I had heard some of your stuff on Instagram. You sent, because you have a lot of great videos on Instagram, and
Thank you.
then you also have a radio show on WRFR.
Hmm.
I remember checking out that stuff, but especially, and I really was digging it. But I remember when you played at Ada's, the first thing that came to mind was it reminded me a lot of Trent Reznor from Nine Inch Nails, his solo stuff, Ghosts, and then also his more soundtrack oriented kind of things that he's done with David Fincher. That was like the impression I have, and I love that music so much. But yet you were like doing your own thing, and then we were talking like recently about movies and certain things that you like a lot, and that that you feel inspire you. So I don't know if you want to like talk about. Obviously, we'll get into that, but if you want to talk about some of the modular stuff, your music background, and just kind of how you generally kind of operate.
Sure. Yeah. Well, like you said, I operate under the name Method from Madness, and right now it's really highly modular based, modular synthesizers, and primarily Eurorack. Mostly because I've been really in love with that instrument,
Right.
and I played music since I was 7. I actually started wanting to play with my older brother. He had a lot of behavioral issues, and drums were a really great therapy for him. And he exposed me to just so much music because he was diving into it, and music's just such a great outlet for
Right.
pretty much everybody, but especially people who have either behavioral issues or just acting out issues, or just issues in general, or just obstacles in life that they want to overcome, or just get through.
Absolutely.
Music's a great one. And so as a kid, I saw him doing that and saw the music thing, and I was like, oh, that's so freaking cool. So he was on drums, and I wanted to play guitar, and started trying guitar, but honestly, at that point in my life, being so young, I thought chords were just over my head at that point. I didn't know anything about theory, but I wanted to do a lot of rock stuff. He listened to a lot of metal, and so I was
Was he
interested.
a few years older too?
He's 7 years older.
7 years older.
So,
Definitely the older brother, right?
yeah. And actually, I got to thank him so much because he exposed me to a lot of stuff I never would have been exposed to as a kid. Because I was too young, my parents wouldn't have let any parental advisory stuff into the house, but he was able to get a hold of it. You remember the days where you could open up a magazine and there'd be a huge list of CDs you could order. It had a little number, and you'd write in on the card which one you wanted.
And T-shirts,
Yeah,
Metal
so
T-shirts.
so he was able to get Korn, Marilyn Manson, Seven Dust, eventually Slipknot and things like that, under the radar of my parents. And so I got to hear that, and I remember Korn being just a huge inspiration for me. Just I'd never heard anything that heavy in my life, and really the only other music I had exposure to was either through church that we were being brought to, which got really old and annoying at times, but I still really loved music and being around it. And then, of course, movies, soundtracks, and the way that the movies made me feel. But even at that young of an age, I had a recognition of the power of music, because you watch a film without any music, unless it was scripted and directed from a point of view where there's going to be an absence of music that would tell the audience how you're supposed to feel. The music just being such a huge part of how the script plays out, how you feel and how you experience the film. So I was really drawn to that. Star Wars was my jam as a kid. Loved it. John Williams, huge influence in my exposure to music and what orchestras could do. And at the same time, jazz was around, and I really liked how it felt, and just the mood that it created. So I got this weird exposure of orchestral music from soundtracks, this gospel. We're in Mid-Coast, Maine, so it's a little bit tamed.
Diversity.
Yeah, and then metal at the same time. So I got this weird spectrum of exposure, and it wanted me to get into it. So I digest, haha, and I eventually was like, I don't want to do guitar, I want to do bass, because there was something about the power that it had and the way that it felt when you just play one note,
Kind of primal. Yeah.
feel it,
Absolutely.
And so I started there and was pretty sheltered, honestly, in my musical genre. And I'm so glad that as the years progressed and as I played my instrument more and played with other musicians, I got exposed to other instruments and just loving the entirety of music. Like, the drums are here and the guitars are here and the bass is here and the vocals are doing this and there's piano doing this. That it really pushed me into more of a wanting to compose or songwrite in general. And so fast forwarding to now, after playing with multiple bands and getting into the recording process, because I'm only one person, I only got 2 hands, 2 arms, there's that limitation.
So you spent a long time like playing bass or guitar or bass in like rock bands. That was
Pretty
like your
much.
formative training or your history.
Yep, and playing with my brother, we got to the point where we were writing songs together. We were trying to record albums. He being older and having a few bands that he was in himself, wanted to just have that creative outlet because it helped with a lot of his.
Was this in Maine?
Yep.
Also. Okay.
Yep. And actually, honestly, I lived in Maine pretty much my entire life. We moved here when I was 6, and
okay.
And I've been in Maine the entire time
cool.
since. But I'm finding with Modular this ability to do all of that: drums, bass, guitar, piano-based kind of melodies, and hopefully get to the point to incorporating live vocals as well, like you do. It's actually really awesome to see that happening. And so, like you were saying at Ada's, that was actually my first live performance doing just Modular stuff. And well, I didn't.
It's wild. Yeah.
It was
wild.
fun, like you said.
Other than like like I mentioned too, like you do, you have a weekly show on WRFR, which is a great like local community-run station in Rockland that has like, well, one of the reasons I love that show is that it's a small little thing going on there, but they have so much variety and I don't know, it's just so many different things, and you always like perform on the show, but that was like I didn't realize that until you just said that I didn't realize that was like your first time like actually taking it out and performing in front of an audience. That's wild.
It was so much fun,
Especially with a crazy table of gray hairs that could have went screaming, but that didn't happen at all.
I was amazed because you're absolutely right. They were right next to that
Yep.
monitor, and they could either have hated it and like, let's get the hell out of here, but like you said, they actually stayed, and one of them actually complimented, saying that was very cool.
Yeah, it
very
was
unique.
a nice surprise.
I really appreciated that, and a lot of people, when I show them that, like on a private 1-to-1, whether it be my friends or if I'm setting up something at the station and someone's there, they're like, what is that?
Well, I remember the last time we played a few months back. It was after the Ada show. We were going to do this party, and that whole thing with the location that was in Camden, it was this whole big thing, and we ended up, kind of scrapping it, but then we ended up just playing here at my house, and it ended up being fun, and we played together, but then after we were done basically jamming together, you gave Mike Whitehead also plays in Quantum, he plays bass for that band, but you gave us a whole like lesson or like a little workshop on how all this craziness works, because I love Modular. I know of a few people that do it, but I don't know anything about how it works, and it's always like it just always seems really mysterious and but awesome. But I remember you stayed for like an hour afterwards, and you were showing, like you gave us like a quick, I don't know, master class, and it was super interesting and fascinating.
So much fun. Yeah, I think it's a fascinating world, and it's a really different way of approaching music, especially since, like I was saying, you can do everything from drum sounds to bass sounds to something that's more chordal or guitar, you could say, a sound, or piano sound. That it does dive into this compositional composer type of feel, you know. And I think the ultimate thing that's really cool about it is it really blurs that line between, you know, when you're on drums, your primary focus is rhythm. You know, there's not necessarily a whole lot of rhythm going on unless you bring in more melodic based rhythm instruments like a xylophone or
Exactly.
marimba and things like that. Or you get, you know, these amazing drummers that are able to take one tom and like get a lot of different tones out of it by pressing on it and changing the tension and stuff. But you're still kind of locked into this rhythmic focus. I like that with modular you can blur those lines quite a bit because you're not limited to necessarily the physical nature of the way the instrument's designed, in that what you're doing is just sculpting electricity, which is really cool. And actually, I'll use that as a segue into you hit the nail on the head of you heard a lot of Trent Reznor, Nine Inch Nails influence, especially from the Ghost albums and their his orchestrations that he does for soundtrack. Huge influence on me. I love the way he approaches creating music. And Nine Inch Nails is mostly known for their song structured based, you could say
Right.
very highly pop influenced approach towards making music. But Trent as an artist, for me, he always wanted to do more in terms of, it's not, oh, well, here's a guitar part that keeps the rhythm going. You know, he's always designing
Right.
these sounds that have this emotional context that fits in the song, and a lot of the lyrics will match up with that. And so it had this artistic craftsmanship behind
Absolutely.
it that I really had an appreciation for. And I think it really shines through when he does those compositional based things versus necessarily the Nine Inch Nails. What's something you could put on a radio or be like a rock based thing.
I know. For me, it's like I grew up listening to Nine Inch Nails, like a lot of kids in the '90s and in high school, and I love, I still love his music, immensely. But I kind of at the end of the day, I almost like his music that he's done with Ghost, and then particularly around the work that he's done as a composer for David Fincher, and also his collaborations with his Atticus.
Atticus Ross.
As Atticus Ross. I remember the first time, like, and again, coming from the perspective that I've always loved Nine Inch Nails and I've always been a huge fan, but I remember the first time I saw The Social Network by David Fincher. I mean, it's such a great movie too, but I remember hearing the music and knowing that was Trent Reznor. It just blew me away, and I was just like, wow, like this, for me, I almost prefer like that stuff, because it does, like you said, it just has like an even more of his music's always had like a cinematic quality, but it kind of raises the bar, I feel like, with the music, because it's so synth heavy, and it has like, if it was handled by somebody who wasn't as talented, it would obviously be maybe less emotional or less organic sounding. But for me, it was like this great balance of like you said, it has this real emotional quality to it, and it obviously put in a it already being having a cinematic quality, but it being even put in in an actual film, so it's a fully realized cinematic experience. To me, it was just even that much more powerful. But
Yep, and I think that's kind of where Method from Madness is being pushed, and just me in general as a musician wanting to do more, is going into this world that is more emotional context based, and that's where I find a great inspiration with modular synths, is that there is this blurred line of like, all right, how can I take these tools that are entirely purposed and focused around sculpting sound to create some type of sonic landscape that has tonality to it, that has emotion to it.
Absolutely.
And you aren't limited necessarily by the stigmas that have been built around these traditional instruments. And like, for instance, you hear a guitar. While it's an immensely versatile instrument, it still always sounds like a guitar. people are like, oh, that's a guitar, and no matter how
Absolutely.
necessarily it's played, it's still a guitar. And while there's still music to this day that I'll create that will take the tonal qualities and characteristics of that instrument and put that into the song, I'm still very, very interested in those sounds that we haven't heard, or taking sounds that might be traditional and warping them and crafting them in a way that it's new, but still has something that we as humans can connect to, that has this emotional quality to
Right.
it. And I think there's a lot of that to be found in the electronic world when we break away from the stereotypes of, oh, electronic music is just dance based.
Yeah,
Things
no,
like that.
I got that impression too from like the stuff I've heard that you've been doing, and when we got to play together. But then also like other modular artists that I've heard, and also in the electronic world, it's like I don't know, it feels like you're getting these new but yet kind of familiar sounds in a way that it like kind of can emotionally, engage with you. But then the sounds are different. It's not like right like you said about the guitar. If you hear a guitar being played in regardless of the genre, like it's a guitar. But with this new unique electronic kind of perspective, it sounds like some kind of alien instrument from a I don't know, a far off planet. But it's also creating this sound or sense of melody that also sounds incredibly foreign, but yet it has like a resonation to it. So it like I don't know, almost acts like twofold or something. Like it's you're hearing these like unique instruments that you can't really pick, or like this, and gives you this otherworldly kind of sense. But then the way the melody is, or the way it might resonate, also has that. So it's almost like two tiers. It's very interesting.
And I especially love the music, and I think Trent's really good at this, where they take that kind of mystery sound, like where is that coming from? That might be synth based, but it's still kind of foreign and otherworldly, and pair it with things that we are familiar with, so you get this really interesting harmony between the two. Especially like on Social Network, pardon me, he incorporates the piano a lot
Right.
into these sonic landscapes that are just creating this tone. It's like a backdrop, like almost like watercolor. If you were to take the canvas and cover it in water and then just spew some paint on it, so it just
Yeah, totally.
the chaos just creates this backdrop, and then like paint over it with more familiar shapes or something that's a bit more realistic. It creates this
Right.
like surrealistic but kind of realistic approach towards it, and I find that very similar in the Eurorack world or the modular world, where there are things that are similar, but there's also this what is that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I like too. Like he'll incorporate, um, you know, live instruments, but then also, more or less synthetic instruments. But that line is blurred as a listener. You're not really sure uh, what is what, and that's part of the magic of it. Like it crosses that threshold of where it's just music at the end of the day, and it's all blended so well, and it's not like the obvious thing where that's a guitar, or that's a bass, or that's a synth patch, or it kind of all like washes together. And I just think that in itself is so inspiring and kind of a science. There's that science of how that's done, like that magical part of it. But I like that was the thing that I got, like when that the last time we were together, when we played, there were moments of where I wasn't sure who was doing what, and I wasn't sure like some of the sounds that you came up with to kind of blend into like what we were doing, and then vice versa. But especially with some of the things you were coming up, like it was like there were sounds I never had really heard before, and I kept trying to look over to see like what the heck is that? Like what's going on over there? Like was that like glockenspiel or some like synth from the '80s? But it wasn't really any of that. It was just, again, like I said before, it was just like this real fresh experience, all around. But one of the other movies too, like for me, like for that really made me think of those artists differently, but then was a real pivotal role in like, I guess to a degree it was a game changer for me personally, but where I was like, I don't know how the hell I'm going to do it, and I have a little bit of experience, but it's not nowhere near on that level, and it still isn't. But I was like, after I saw Social Network, and I was like kind of obsessed with that movie, and particularly the soundtrack. It was that film, and then also this Ryan Gosling movie called Drive.
Oh God, I still need to see that.
That I saw, and that also has a lot of incredible electronic music in it. Those two movies in particular, I was just like, I remember after that, I was like, I don't know how the hell I'm going to do it, but I want to make this kind of music somehow. And that was like what changed for me. And I know you mentioned about some movies, like you talk about Star Wars, which is like, a universally embraced thing, John Williams, legendary music. Were there like any thoughts or things you wanted to share about how films or directors inspire what you do? Or
Oh yeah. Well, again, that whole emotional aspect of what the music. I've always liked it when directors and composers bring out the fact that the music itself is very much so a character in the script, and it acts and conveys things about the story that while the human beings and the actors and actresses within the script and within the frame that you're looking at are trying to convey, sometimes the music needs to be there as an actor to help convey what's really going on, maybe a sub-narrative or like someone saying something but it's a lie. You don't know that necessarily because they're not coming out and saying it, but the music will be there to kind of just put that seed in your head of there's more to it than this. Actually, I think a good example that I heard about was Home Alone, John Williams again.
That's right.
When that first was premiered to the execs, they were like, it's an alright film. It's got some ups and downs. And then when they did the next premiere to the execs before it came out with the soundtrack, they were crying, because they were just like, it's a masterpiece.
Was that much stronger?
That much stronger. And I mean, that's a testament also to John Williams' just amazing craftsmanship in composition. There's moments in every film that he does, pretty much, especially the ones that were really kind of something special, where he's able to take these familiar instruments and find something really special about the tonality of the instrument, or something that it can do that's different, or harmonizes with another instrument really differently, that creates this sonic quality about it that just is iconographic. It's its own character. Like one thing in Star Wars that always is just magical whenever you watch it is his use of the xylophone, or at times he'll use violins to create like these fluttering sounds while they're going through space. And while it might just be 2 or 3 notes, which the notes can be played on any instrument, even a rhythmic instrument if you have the right instrument. It's not so much the notes; it's the timbre of the sound. It's these emotional enunciations that these instruments are able to do, and those are things that I think are really obscure, that take a different approach towards music. It's different than theory. It's different than like a cool riff. It's blurring these lines between real communication of emotions and what subharmonics and just the audio spectrum in general and frequencies that just are vibrating our ear, what those things can do. And with film especially, it's really fun to not have the audience distracted by those that's a guitar. Oh, that's a drum set.
It absolutely, it takes you out of the scene.
Exactly.
Right.
It's almost like seeing a Dunkin' Donuts cup in Game of Thrones. It's just gonna be like, wait a second, what's that? So
That's not right.
That's not right. If you take a period piece and suddenly you hear hip hop in it, You know, unless that could be a creative approach that would be interesting, but it would kind of be juxtapositioned, you know,
Right,
and like
right.
this, it creates this weird emotional, kind of takes me out of the script. So figuring out ways to uh, focus more in on what these harmonics are doing, what the sound spectrum is doing to our emotions in context with the script. I think it's very interesting, especially with the electronic world, that you could do something musically that visually might be in the 17th century, but maybe the soundtrack is created entirely electronically. You
Right,
could
right.
do that, and it comes down to a different craftsmanship. It comes down to a different way of looking at music.
Very interesting.
And
Yeah.
I find that, going on a bit of a tangent here, but I find that as I've worked with bands and just seen what happens with the industry and the way people listen to music, I find myself being nudged more into why I even liked music in the first place, and that's that magical quality about it. That some could call it an escape, but I think it's more of transcendental, where
Absolutely.
there's something you hear and it vibrates your eardrum and it connects with you on for many different reasons, because ultimately it's just sound. And as we grow up in this life, we hear things like a guitar or a drum. You know, there's always that subconscious recognition of
Right.
what something is,
Right.
and I think it kind of taints what the whole point of music is. And allowing me to segue a little bit here, growing up in the metal world and learning riffs,
Same here. Yep.
you know,
Yep.
like there was. I have a great appreciation for it, but there's definitely this competitive factor in like this. Oh, nobody's as heavy as this, or nobody plays as fast as these
Right,
guys,
right.
or nobody shreds as quickly. And that's very technical based and technique based, and that's admirable. But I think it's getting away from why we even as humans listen to music. What's so special
Right,
and
right.
spiritual about it?
Right.
And so I think that has really nudged me in the direction of being very interested in the electronic world, because it's not so much focused on being the best DJ or making the craziest synth sound ever. It's all about what the audio is doing. Do you like it? Does it create an atmosphere that you enjoy?
Definitely. Definitely.
And that's the real magic of music, I think. I remember I was talking with somebody who, you know, they just grew up in a generation that had a chip on their shoulders with electronic. And I'm no better. When I grew up, I had this weird, like, they're just pressing buttons and all that crap until I got
Absolutely,
exposed to it.
absolutely.
And I had to tell them, like, well, look, when you get down to it, it's all just sound. It's all just sound. So you can't say that. I mean, we've all listened to birds chirping. That's not an instrument. That's just a sound. And many people find it very relaxing, and there's an emotional context with that. And it's just sound. It's just
Right.
it's just a
That's what it comes
vibration
down
in your
to.
ear. And so I find myself also being nudged in that direction, where it's like it's not about how skillful you are at your instrument. While that's admirable and very encourageable for people to keep doing better and being able to work their craft better and what they're interested in, I just find myself more interested in what does the sound of birds do to you? You know, what does the sound of the ocean do to you? And what are ways of creating new sounds, especially with these electronic instruments or even acoustical instruments, that create these emotional responses?
Absolutely.
It's very different based.
That's like you brought it up for a second there, like where, you know, everybody has their particular styles or things that they gravitate towards, and they you know, like they kind of, you know, always go back to, and then they might check out a wide spectrum of different things, whether it's in film or movie or art in general. But I mean, and you know, we all have our kind of our own personal biases, or you know, we look at certain things that we feel we might not understand, or you know, have this preconceived thing, and it creates a wall against it. But like that happens a lot with me, not so much anymore, but and I know it happens a lot for other people who are doing electronic music in a way of where, and again, you could like it or you don't like it, but people who are doing electronic music get that, or if they're doing, say, original material, a lot of people on the outside assume, well, you're just like DJing, and that you're just basically playing other people's music. Like a lot of the times for me, especially in the early part of when we started our band Quantum, there were, I had a little circle of friends that knew me from playing drums and different bands and whatnot. But when it came to the Quantum thing, they only looked at it as, well, you're DJing, and I would always say, well, no, well, DJ culture, especially like in the early house years of when that music came out, and techno and all that kinds of stuff. But DJ culture is like very much a big source of personal inspiration for me, and I do take things from that. But what we do, or what we've been always kind of doing from the band, and it has nothing to do with whether someone likes it or not, but we don't really DJ. We do all original music, and we don't do remixes, and we don't like do collaborations in that regard. We're doing all original material, and then the other bias the other thing that would come up was a lot of the times if they only assume, and getting back to like kind of what you're saying about like our perception of instruments, or how we get the information from what we believe is music from instruments, they assume that like if they don't see somebody on stage, say with a traditional bass or guitar or drum set or vocal like your traditional setup, they assume that if someone is behind something they can't really recognize, or maybe they're using some kind of software, that's not, they don't equate that with music.
Right.
And that's also, that's a normal set of things that people or have a response to. But again, like you said, it's like, like that famous quote, I might butcher it, but like by Dizzy Gillespie, famous jazz trumpet player. And I remember he had given an interview probably like in the height of his career, the height of his power, and he was doing this interview, and he was talking, the guy who was interviewing him was talking about music that he loves, that he found personally inspiring, and he was talking about how he named like all these classical composers, real modern jazz artists, avant-garde artists, pop stars, rock bands. He named like all these different genres of music that he really loved and that was inspiring for him personally. And he was saying, well, I don't really look at, genres, or I don't have this hang up about it. He's like, well, if it, there's good and bad, and when you dig into a certain style of music or art, you can kind of, you can develop a taste about how things, the quality of it. But he was saying it just, it either resonates with you or not. He doesn't believe in the hang-ups of like, well, they're doing something really unorthodox, or this is a style I'm not familiar with, so automatically it doesn't resonate with me. It's like it's either good or bad, and he didn't have any of those hang-ups, and I always thought that was really cool, and it's very inspiring, and because like you said, what we're doing, and especially what you're doing, it's about cultivating sound and just breaking it down in its purest form, and it's gonna probably resonate with most people, and probably people who for instance, probably those folks, like we said, at the table that was at Ada's, they might not have been ever exposed to something like that because it's not traditionally what they've ever seen, but yet it resonated with them, and it's about that emotional, that primal connection with it, and it doesn't really matter if it's somebody sitting behind a laptop or playing a cowbell. I mean, it's going to resonate with you or not. But I just thought that was an interesting thing when you brought that up. Like it's about sound.
Yeah.
At the end of the day,
ultimately, and actually, technically, we won't go on that rant. But going back to soundtracking and films, the music being such a
integral part of the script and where it's going and the types of moods that it can elicit. I spoke a lot about the soundscape and like sonic backdrops and things like that. I don't want to discount theory necessarily.
Right.
Like, it's important to understand like why we emotionally resonate with a minor versus a major, and where, you know, what those things can do in the placement of a major chord or a minor chord in a setting of a script. You know what it can do, and like John Williams, being very classically trained, but also having a very amazing imagination with these instruments. You know, some of the things that make the music that he creates so unique are simple melodies, you know, which are just pitches in a certain order that seem to resonate with us as
Like
well.
a classic example, like Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Oh
you know?
God, perfect.
So
example.
simple, but everybody and their grandmothers heard that theme, and so it just like same thing with, you know, Star Wars, but it's just as soon as you hear those first couple of notes, you're just like, you're there and you know exactly what it is.
Yep,
Yeah.
and I'm glad you brought that up because, for instance, that being a melodic, you could say theme or character,
Right.
And it kind of instantly makes you remember the script, what the film felt like, and the experience you had with it.
Absolutely.
One thing I found that's interesting about that particular melody is you could transpose that melody to many different instruments and still have that kind of same subconscious, oh, I know that's Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and
Yep.
probably still have that same emotional response that it has. Meanwhile, you take the theme from, let's say, Jaws, two notes, everybody who
Literally,
has seen
yeah.
it will remember that.
Absolutely.
But if you were to, the original introduction to that composition starts with a cello, and it's that low, foreboding, almost, there's this breathy quality to the string that comes out of it, but also it being in a lower register and the key that it's in, and just those two notes being a half step apart, there's this emotional foreboding, something menacing, something
Absolutely.
that's creeping about it. That if you were to take that same theme and play it on a piano, it's going to have a different emotional context, you know? Or if you played it on a xylophone, totally different emotional context, you know? So there's this interesting quality that happens when you experience audio with a visual accompaniment that can determine how you experience or remember that sonic landscape based off of the actual sound itself. So, like with Close Encounters of the Third Kind, you could hear that, like I said, on multiple instruments, and just based off the context of the script, how it's presented, and what it means in that script, the message will still come across no matter what instrument you play. Meanwhile, you take the theme from Jaws and you put it on a different instrument. Someone might not recognize it immediately. Like if you played it on a marimba, you know, someone would be like, "It's two notes," you know. But if you were to take a cello and play
Right.
those same notes, people would be like, "That's Jaws."
Right.
So it's interesting
Right.
where there are certain bits about music where the melody itself is the character. Not so much the sonic soundscape around what's conveying that melody or trying to communicate that melody, but the melody itself. And that's very theory based and is really interesting. But then there's also the other comparison I'm making with Jaws, in that the sonic structure of those notes and those pitches is very much so an integral part of the message it's trying to convey. And I find that to be a really interesting study, and that comes out quite a bit in film. There's something about witnessing or experiencing melody in association with an image that could either be more musically based, like melodic based, or more contextual sonically based. And I find that to be a very interesting study too. And I think one thing that's really interesting about the electronic world is the ability to blur those two together, where
Right,
you can
right.
still focus on strong melodies. You can focus on chord progressions and melodies that layer on top of it, while at the same time bringing this sound design approach, where it's like, all right, yeah, that melody is strong there, but what emotion am I trying to convey with this melody? And how does it harmonize with what's going on in this part of the music? And then when you throw in film or some visual accompaniment with it, it creates another layer.
Yeah, these are everything you're talking about is totally fascinating. But for me, it's like that's like how the way you're explaining it is exactly why. For me, like my favorite experience, like my two favorite things to do, when I have free time or just whatever, is to go see live music, like go out for a couple of beers or whatever and go see a band or whatever capacity it is. I just love going to see music. But my other love that I love doing just about as much and sometimes almost more, but is going to see a movie, but going to a theater and actually going to that and having like the way you're describing those two methods or methods of madness or
See what you
approaches.
did there.
To me, that's like that. It's about that immersion, total immersion. Sitting in that dark room and having that experience. You're maybe in a room where there's a group of people. They're all strangers, but you're sitting in that dark place. And if the theater is, a good theater, you're having that immersive experience, that kind of ritualistic experience, and those things that you talk about, like I think that's what those are the key ingredients that are that make that soup tasty, and that like you can, I think you can still have that experience away from it, but like I have not that I'm bragging or anything, but I have like two man caves, and I have one system in my house where I watch, like I buy a lot of movies and I collect movies and I watch a lot of movies. I'm not just a collector. I usually watch all the movies I buy, but I have a pretty good surround sound system for my Blu-ray player, and it's really great. On certain films, it's really an intense experience. But at the end of the day, if I get a chance to see something in a movie at the movies, I'll do what I can to do it, because to me that's like the ultimate form of escapism when you're seeing a movie. But all those components that you were talking about, I think, is really what that's about, because it's that line of where it's all being blended together. One movie I really love, and that's always been inspiring for me on many levels, is Ridley Scott's Blade Runner. It's like one of those films where, like, the film, Vangelis's music for that film, I feel, is such an integral part of that movie. It acts as like a character, but then also Sid Mead's work and Ridley Scott's incredible direction. They're so great. They're characters in itself, and you can visually, like, you could turn the sound off. Like, I think if you watch Blade Runner, and you would get just so much. But then vice versa, you could just listen. I have a bunch of copies, editions of the soundtrack for that, and you can listen to just the music, and it's still that you still get such an incredible experience. But when you combine them, I think it raised the bar almost, where when you have all those things together of a perfect harmony of sight and sound, it's totally that like complete immersive experience, where it transports you. But anyway, it's just it's such a great thing as to why I'm drawn back to that.
Well, there's a magic quality about
Right.
it, like this transcendentalness where when you're in the movie theater, if you were a complete realist, you're just sitting in a room, it's dark, you're having air around you being moved by these cones, whatever material they're made out of, that's vibrating the air, hitting your ear, and you're just literally watching light just reflecting into your eyes, and that's so boring. If you look at it from that realistic approach, we don't go to the movie theater just to have air vibrated and just look at light. When we watch a movie, our brains tap into this very primordial human characteristic that we share as a species of escaping the moment, almost out of body experience, that we're bearing witness to something, whether
Absolutely.
that's what stories are, but the way in which it's told can be such a integral part of that experience. That's where the talents of directors come in. That's where the talents of musical craftsmen or sound craftsmen, if I want to give it the broadest definition that I can. Cinematographers, just even the color of something can create a tone. And all that's part of this magic that makes us believe something's there. When if you were to be a true realist, it's just light, which is just a vibration hitting our eyes, and the oxygen around us vibrating, hitting our ears. And that's such a boring thing. So I think another thing, just to branch off of going to the movies, it's something special about it that amplifies the magic behind it all, where you really get that immersion that is that's not really necessary, but it just really helps amplify the experience that you have.
Absolutely.
And to have people take this craftsman approach towards, all right, well, they're here, these basics are laid out to have this magic happen, but how can I, as you could say a magician even, create an experience that you as a human can find so captivating and so engaging that it creates a memory, when in reality you're just sitting in a room. I think that's something that's very, very interesting, and can happen in all forms of art, whether it just be you sitting in a room listening to music and just completely focusing on it, or even just if you're a photographer, for instance, there's no audio involved whatsoever, you're completely focused on just what you're seeing, or a filmographer, you just what is this light conveying to you on emotional quality. All those crafts coming together make seeing a film in the theater such a special thing. Got to give a shout out to Flagship Cinemas. They're doing renovations, and if you're in the local area, go check them out, buy some concessions, keep them alive, because going to see a film in theaters is extremely...
I was just going to ask you about that. Because, obviously, streaming and various other reasons, but it's probably mostly attributed to streaming, but like the Colonial Movie Theater, which was a beloved theater here in Belfast, so I used to go, many memories of seeing films there. That, will always be part of me. And, so like the only theater locally that's close by and that's good is good old Flagship. And now when I go to the movies, that's usually where I go. I just saw Violent Night there, and then we also saw Avatar 2, The Way of Water, and it's amazing that they're still going, that theater, and that's a precious thing. I've noticed since I've been going there this fall, like more and more people have been going. The last couple times I went there, it was really full, whereas like the summer before last I went there, it was like me and my couple of friends I went, and if I went to a movie by myself, a matinee, or like I'd go after. I used to work in Rockland, so I would go there on Friday nights, and sometimes I'd go with a friend, and then sometimes I'd just pop in after work to the late show, and I'd literally be the only person in there, and be on a Friday night, and I'm just like, wow, like, because I don't know anybody personally. Like, I have one buddy, maybe one or two other people that I know. They like movies, and one in particular who. Two of them that actually love movies. We go to the movies, but other friends and other people I know, it's all streaming, and they never go. I don't like. Do Do you still go to the film to see films in
Yeah.
the theater?
Like you're saying, there's just something special about it. Don't get me
Absolutely.
wrong. I've made the argument even to myself where, sometimes when the theater's packed,
People talking, making noise,
yeah,
or
that can be annoying.
passing gas or whatever.
At the same time, I've had great experiences. Actually, one of the most memorable was Star Wars when I was a kid. When there's a build up for the experience that you're going to have, and
The
everyone's kind of
anticipation.
just like a concert.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Everyone's there, almost like church. You're all focused on one
Yep.
thing, and it's a really cool feeling about that, where you're all part of this experience.
Absolutely.
You're all seeing and hearing what's going on, and I've always really appreciated the ability to. Some people are like, well, I'll just do it in my own home. I can go to the bathroom right there. No one's bothering me. But there is this kind of special experience, especially when you go with other people, a small group of people, or even just someone you really care about as a good friend, where when you're exiting the theater, after you've had that experience and been able to share it, where you start sharing things about it that, oh man, that was really cool. Or
Talk about it. Yep.
talk about it, and that drive home together, you can talk about it. Where if you were in your same house, you might be more apt to just get on with your daily routine instead of having those moments of, well, there's nothing better to do other than talk about what just happened. And that can help heighten it and just create it, make it feel a little bit more special. Kind of like actually buying vinyl.
Sifting through the bends, the whole tactile thing.
Yeah, there's something about
Absolutely.
it that's different. Of course, I understand for people who are just go, 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 go.
Right.
Maybe taking that time is just impractical or not an option.
Or they find it's, too expensive. I mean, everything is expensive these days, but
Yeah.
that's a factor too. But so I understand. I have a couple of friends that like movies, but they never go to the theater because of that.
Mm-hmm.
So I understand that, but it's interesting to see. Like, I don't think it will ever go away.
Mm-hmm.
As far as I think there always will be people and an audience to see films, but it's so technology and everything is just changing so rapidly. I'm just curious to see. I mean, I don't know where do you see it? I mean, I noticed just from the big difference in the last, maybe even a year or two before the pandemic. I noticed a huge change. Like, where do you see it going, or do you have any thoughts on that? As far as
Especially, I'm currently dating the manager of a movie theater, and I'm getting some inside information of some of the data that they've been seeing, and especially when the theater was we were coming out of COVID, which changed everything. And I think coming out of it, when people were coming out again, going outside and wanting to do more things, people had that urge of like, wait, I miss doing that. I think a lot of people were focused on other activities than necessarily movies because we had streaming. We went through COVID with the ability to stream. We had movies at home, and when it was time to reemerge and kind of get back to normal, there were other things other than movies on people's minds. And so the theaters were struggling to get people in. It was kind of like, where are we going? Streaming is taking over. People can watch these things from the convenience of their own home. They don't have to go and spend a whole bunch of money that already seems like a lot, when honestly, in the movie theater world, they don't make money off tickets. They
sit
don't.
home and make their own popcorn or whatever.
And the reason why food is so expensive, and a lot of people don't know this, and it's always just kind of like hey, just so you know, so you understand where your money's going. The tickets, that goes straight to Hollywood. The only thing keeping the building running, the electricity going, the employees being paid, all of the maintenance that has to go on these machines comes from food. That's why those prices are so high. And honestly, they're just going to go up. That's just the nature of things right now with the economy the way it is. However, without diverging too much, when the theater was a bit in jeopardy, the
a local news station came and actually interviewed the lady I'm dating, and she was talking about some of the struggles and the possibility of the theater going away. And I hope this is something that would happen more throughout the world, but especially here in Midcoast, Maine, since there is quite an interesting communal glue between all of us of wanting to keep things going, get back to normal. When that got posted, there were a lot of people coming out going, wait, you guys are closing? And that put the idea in their head of like, this could go away. This could go bye-bye. And I think that hit something within people of like, well, I don't want it to go away. It might go away, so I'm going to go back to it and try it. So they had a big turnout come out after that posted.
Amazing.
I think Top Gun Maverick came out, and there was such a big appreciation for that film. There's the nostalgia factor got hit by a lot of people going and loving the first one, and it being such a big cult thing. That brought a lot of people. That was
almost
massive.
set the kind of the train on the tracks back again.
Yeah,
you know?
it really, I think
Great movie too.
gave the CEOs a refreshing wind while they're focusing on how to keep this place running, and it being like, dude, no one's coming out. We can't afford. No one's buying anything.
Right.
We can't. This isn't a charity. We have to run a business. That gave them a breath of fresh air of going, oh, people still want to go see movies in theaters.
They do want that experience.
They do want that experience. And people themselves, I think, when they are braced with the real concept of something that they actually do enjoy being taken away or just going away, they'll hold on to it.
Taking things for, it's easy to take things for granted.
Very much so. And so seeing that, Black Panther did really, really great.
Obviously, Avatar.
Avatar's killing it. It's just done really well. And that's been great to see. It's been really refreshing for everybody, to the point that the theater that my lady runs, it shook the CEOs enough to say, hey, we're gonna renovate this place. So
That's
they're
amazing.
actually pouring some money back into this. And I think some things things will change and morph. I really hope that, since you do have the convenience of streaming, there is that reality of there's an experience here that people want. Very similar to how, you can stream music, but there is something about going to the store, checking it out, or buying the CD that it is going to stay alive. It's probably going to morph into something different. I wouldn't be surprised if maybe a decade or so down the road, maybe they change it in terms of exclusivity, kind of like a concert where it's like, oh, if you want general admission, it'll be this price, but maybe we have some VIP booths. In fact, actually, the lady I'm dating mentioned that she was talking to someone who's higher up in the theater organization who's taking a trip over to Bangkok. And over in Bangkok, they have this theater where they have the general admission, but they also have VIP booths that have
a specialty.
Oh, it's got
Wow.
a bed.
Huh.
They give you a robe. It's got its own private fridge. And so I'm like,
For the theater experience.
the theater experience. So I'm thinking that maybe as long as they have the capital, that we might see a shift in that there'll be like VIP seating. There'll be a heightened placement in that room that you pay maybe a little bit more to have a heightened experience.
Having more experience.
Yeah, and
Wow,
maybe
cool.
we might see that. I really don't know. I'm not in that world per se. But what I am seeing is that there has been a recognition that people will go out to see films, and that there is actions being taken to keep it alive. So that's a great thin
I've seen that too with directors. One of my favorite directors, I just actually picked it up. I didn't, speaking of theaters, I was so mad at myself for not getting a chance to see it in the theater, but I got it on DVD, or saw it on DVD, and I just bought it on Blu-ray. But Denis Villeneuve, who his last film is, he made the remake of Dune. And and also we talked about Top Gun Maverick, which is a great movie. I saw it and I was really impressed with that movie. It's a really really good movie. But anyway, like I know Tom Cruise has definitely been pretty outspoken about it too. But Denis Villeneuve in particular, it's like on one fold you can't, you know, like technology is this thing that's kind of just going and it's just going on its own, and you can't like take it and put it in a box and stick it in a closet and hope it's gonna quiet down or something. It's gonna, you know, it's gonna grow exponentially no matter what. So we just need to, you know, well, us the people in the arts have to kind of adjust to that and how people's habits and kind of monitor how people check things out or how they consume things. But it's interesting too because what I've seen, I remember seeing an interview, and I've also seen Tom Cruise talk about it. But there was when Denis Villeneuve was doing press conferences right before the release of Dune. He was talking about he designed this movie for that experience of going to a theater. Like he specifically that was his goal. And he was really steadfast, not that he was saying or poo-pooing it or saying that it should just like it's a bad thing, it should go away, but he was saying, he was like kind of drawing a line in the sand to a degree. He's like, this will be a true, is meant to be a true cinematic experience. And so when that film came out, the Dune remake, it was released, you know, only in theaters, and I think maybe it might have even been just fairly recently where it was available streaming. So it was much later after its initial release date that it was you know, available that way.
Yeah.
Whereas like now the trend now there's like movies, you know, I remember going to see Halloween. That might have been the first time I became a little bit more aware of it, but I remember going to see Halloween Kills in the theater at Flagship, but the same day it was released on Peacock. And now I'm seeing with like films that they're doing that where they're all automatically available on all of these platforms. Like I don't believe Maverick was positioned that way. I think it was focused on people getting their butts to the theater.
Yeah.
And then after maybe a year or 6 months, there was other options. So it's interesting to see where that's going. And both of those movies that talked about made massive amounts of money. I mean, massive amounts of money. So it's clearly not a thing of like, there's still people who are going to do it. I mean,
Oh yeah.
so, you know, it's an interesting thing. And like you were talking a lot about, we were talking about soundtracks, and we're getting close to a little over an hour here, and I want to keep you too long. But with your experience, yeah, this is totally a total blast, man. With your experience and like how you think about sound and designing sound and your really great analogies about film score and soundtrack, do you have any like experience like working on like, I don't know, like film projects per se, or like have desire to go down that road?
Oh yeah, hardcore. I've had some experience, mostly with some people who, you know, they knew me and they were like, well, I need some type of soundtrack, you know, and I'll just do it. And you know, I did it, but it was very amateur. You know, everything to get better at something takes practice, and of course I would accept anything that came my way because I just wanted that practice. I wasn't expecting to do anything groundbreaking or anything, but it was absolutely awesome to practice with that, and that is absolutely something I would love to do. Or if anybody wanted to even just, hey, let's see what happens, I'd love to pursue that and dive into that more, because it's what I love to do. It's very interesting. It's a way to use a discipline that I hold very dear for myself and a very big craft interest, but it's also such a mysterious and fun process because I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what's going to come out of me. I don't know how it's going to react to the creators or the viewers. That it's very, very exciting. That for me is just, it feels very different than performing. It's just very different, and I think it's a bit more of a magical thing. And I think I'm glad you brought up Dune, because I gotta admit I was blown away by that in the weirdest way. And
the composer Hans Zimmer, I love pretty much everything he does, because he too is one of those composers that, while different from Trent Reznor, is more classically oriented, still has this very sharp focus on sound design and creating new things. There's countless interviews where he always states that he's trying to always find something new. What sounds are new, and trying weird things. I remember when the Dune came out, he although I think it might still be, I haven't looked into it at all recently, but he was very, very hush-hush about the instruments that he made, or the things that he worked
Really?
with other musicians to create this sonic soundscape that was familiar but otherworldly, because he really did want to create sounds that were different, things you never heard before, that were foreign. So when you're watching this, you know
It's a real new experience too.
that, and it's not in the solar system, but there's still humans in this story. So blurring that line between familiarity and foreign, it was a real big approach for him in that. And when you listen to the soundtrack, I feel that, like
Absolutely.
and especially holy shit,
Totally transcending, and I mean, talking about the immersive experience.
Yeah, and he actually, like you were saying, the director was focusing on creating something that was built around the objective of you having an experience in this theater. He constructed the whole soundtrack to be experienced in Atmos, which is the kind of the new next thing when it comes to experiencing audio, because it's based on having 8 or 16 speakers. So this complete surrounding, immersing experience. I personally haven't had the luxury of being able to experience it. Would fucking love to.
Yeah, well, I mentioned it briefly. I had just ordered an album by Tangerine Dream that I had heard from this. I feel terrible that I can't remember his name right now, but he's the guitar player for Porcupine Tree. An amazing musician. But he was talking about his favorite albums, but he was talking about that same technology, Atmos.
Atmos, yeah.
He lives in London, and he does these shows or these collaborations with different artists. Well, where they'll have basically an album release event, but they'll have them in these theaters, and it's all set up with the Atmos capabilities. And I haven't experienced it yet, but it sounds like it's next level. Just completely insane. So.
And like I was saying, where you could feel it in Hans Zimmer's composition.
Yeah.
I listened to that soundtrack a bit, and especially he came out with this collection of, I think honestly, just sound examples and demos called The Art and Soul of Dune. It came with this book that was all about the concept drawings for Dune, and it was supposed to be the soundtrack to accompany reading and looking at the book, which was a really awesome idea. I've had an idea of creating some type of audio landscape that's supposed to be accompanied with some type of either a comic book or something that you read, just to create even more immersion in it.
That immersive thing.
But when you listen to it and you know what the visuals are of the film, one thing that always stood out to me was his ability to create the sound of being in a vast desert where there's just this wind and just dust. And that, from a musical perspective, since in terms of melody, it's not really anything melody, it's more backdrop. One note, two note, maybe a couple.
Real minimalist.
Very minimalist, but it's all about tonality. And he just does a fantastic job with that, on top of the John Williams approach, where that frickin' theme that he came up with is so awesome and beautiful and familiar, but it's just so damn good.
Yeah, what else can be said about that? I mean, so universal.
It's so good. But yeah, experiencing that in theaters and experiencing film in theaters, there's just nothing quite like it.
unless you have the luxury of creating your own home theater. But it's still special. There's something that it's not like doing the dishes. You sit down, you turn the lights off, you get in the proper position.
Yeah, and I think it plays into like we're all like social creatures, so it also plays into that. Like we want to, like we're not gonna part of the fun, like just like you're talking about concerts and stuff, like there wouldn't be. There would still be a craving, but if you realize like you paid a ticket to go see one of your favorite bands, whether it was in a big venue or a small venue, and you were going and you realized after you bought your ticket, well, you're really gonna be the only person. There's only gonna be two people there, and it's really just like a private show, but in a big theatrical rock concert kind of setting.
Mm-hmm.
People would obviously still want to go, but it would also be like that extra magic fairy dust wouldn't be there for that experience. Like, that's part of the thing, is to be in that room where you're everybody's like focused on this one thing, and you're transported to a different place for a couple hours. So it just it just wouldn't. So it's that social aspect too, I feel like, and that's why getting back to the theater thing, like that's you sitting in a room with a bunch of strangers. I mean, like the last movie I saw in the theater was Deadly Night, and that was one of the best like film going experiences that I've had in a while, because I went there. We went on I think it was a Saturday night, and it was packed. It was a packed theater, but people were like talking to the screen, laughing their butts off. People were jumping. You heard a couple of people screaming in the back, and because the film has so many great qualities to it, and it was like great. It was immersive, and it wasn't a thing of like where people complain about going to the theater, of like people talking or a bunch of teenagers in the back screaming or people being on their phones. It wasn't that kind of thing. It was like people were into the movie and invested in it and just having a good ride. And it had been a while since I'd been to a theater, and that was the case. Like even when I saw Avatar, which was great to see in the theater, there was a lot of people, but it was kind of sedate. It was kind of a sedate crowd. But when I saw this last film, it was like, oh, like this is why, like it's that, this is why you have that social kind of interaction, and you never have to say a word to anybody there, but you're just in that collective state, and it's just so awesome.
Yeah, and that's always a hit or miss. I wish it was more of like a when you're going to the movies, you kind of have this communal trust that everyone that's going there is going to be focused on the experience, and not necessarily distracted by the outside world, whether it be on their phones or they're just like, I don't give a shit about this at all, so I'm just gonna act a fool.
Glazed, everything's just kind of glazed over their engagement. So.
Yeah, there's a hit or miss with that, but I think if anybody watching or listening, hears that, just I guess maybe there's a bit of insight of recognizing how important your actions in the community can be. Just even going out to the movie theaters is helping keeping that ritual alive. We are a species that comes from ritualistic tendencies, or creating romanticizing things to the point that it becomes a tradition, or you could say a ritual. Going to the theater is very ritualistic. I remember going to church, that everyone would consider that to be a ritual, or praying together to be a ritual, or singing together as a ritual. But, you go to a concert, it's very similar. It's a bunch of people focused on one thing. It's very ritualistic.
I've thought about that for like a long time, and not to get off on a weird tangent, but it's kind of related to this, but like I remember reading about about this group of atheists that were gaining some kind of clout, and they were gaining in this gaining grounds as far as getting traction, and they were basically talking about how they obviously didn't believe in God or any form of God, and so they were all steeped. Everything that their perspective was focused on was, it's got to be by the book and by science. Like there's no you can't suspend that at all. And so they were talking about, well, religion and God and the concept of God, all those things are, it's an illusion, blah, blah, blah. But then they were also talking about taking it almost a step further, where they were talking about, like, one of my favorite writers of all time, one of my personal inspirations is Joseph Campbell. And, the power of myth. And so they were taking it a step further, where they were saying that, well, religion and that primal experience of, like, the ritualistic pageantry around it, all those things, even outside of the actual dogma of certain religious practice, but they were talking about, well, because the core of it is all make-believe, like basically mythology and that whole ritualistic aspect, like, we don't really need that because it's all make-believe, and that it should be kind of discarded. And so I think, and I feel like, well, it's really impossible for us to do. I don't believe that should happen, and it won't ever happen. But I think it's just in our nature, like, because whether you believe in God or you're the most hardcore atheist, you still participate in ritual everywhere. You go to a birthday party, people light candles, put candles in a cake. You go to a friend's opening for their business. There's champagne bottle, and there's like a little ceremony around that. You go to a sporting event. I mean, we're ritualistically we're immersed all the time, and theaters are that same thing. I mean, music, concerts, all those things. But we do it, all the time. So and I think with technology, everything, obviously we were talking about movies, but it's changing and morphing into something different. But that's just how we are. That's like that's like part of our lizard brain.
Yeah, and I think alluding to how technology is evolving and how we're not going to be able to put the brakes on it at all unless something really, really big happens, and then only those who already have it and have the means and resources to continue it will continue it, while the rest just try to get on with survival and having to deal with the elements and probably participate in those rituals. I think there's always going to be this tug of war between logic, reason, and just the chaotic magic of just being an organic being. And that I think routing this back around to the music that we're talking about, the music I create and go to, that you create and gravitate towards, and theater, the focusing more or having more fun with the ritualistic aspect of it versus necessarily a business side, or like what's guaranteed to happen, that I find a lot with business. And when you find predictability in things, or very similar patterns with, like, there's certain movies that you're just like, I know what's going to happen. It's as if they just copied and pasted this, versus I have no idea what's going to happen because, like, it's just crazy and really out there, and people were really trying to push
Can't get out of my seat, right?
Yeah, it all comes down to that ritualistic part of going out and having this transcendental experience. And like I was saying, there's the people that I wouldn't be surprised if there was a hardcore atheist that was like, why am I sitting in a dark room just having vibrations hit my ear and looking at a screen that's just light? Versus the person who is sitting in the room and completely having an out-of-body experience based off of just engaging with a story. As we embrace this technology that's, allowing us to have that, or a fraction of that experience in our own home, there's still going to be this organic demand of wanting to have a more ritualistic, a grandiose, romanticized type of experience. And I think that tug of war as we go into the future, especially with movies, like you said, it's never going to die. It might morph into something that's more exclusive, but the people that still have a value for something that's more ritualistic versus why would I waste an hour of my day driving there, waiting in line, eventually getting into this room when I could be at my own house, and then have to drive back and all that. There will be those people too, but there's going to be a balance, where Same thing with music, where it's like, why would I go to a music store, spend half an hour browsing through shit I don't even know if I care about, and then maybe even take a chance. I can't even listen to it when it's there, you know? I don't give a shit. Versus I could just
What, I mean,
pull up
just
my
judge
phone.
it by the artwork?
Yeah, you know, but there's going to be those people like, no, they find that really thrilling. So there will be this balance, I believe. And the same thing with music. I find myself being more drawn towards the what music can do in an atmosphere for people, versus necessarily I'm gonna put on a jazz show or I'm gonna put on a rock concert, so people come with this presumptive expectation of what's gonna happen. I definitely find myself more leaning towards and having more fun creating something that is a bit more transcendental and taps more into that ritualistic nature of who we are, how we experience things, and in particular, specific terms, what music does and what audio does.
Awesome.
That's what I approach.
This has been a total blast. Spencer, thanks for doing this. We're closing up on almost an hour and a half. I don't want to keep you too much longer. This has been a totally awesome experience. Before we get going, is there anything you want to plug to where people can find your music or anything that you got going on creatively?
Sure. It's been a slow-going process. Definitely, modules aren't cheap, and getting through winter here is always a bit of a struggle. And just the nature of where we are, the demographic, it's always a challenge to turn it into a form of income that keeps it progressing the rate at which I want it to. But as of right now, I operate as Method from Madness, which can be found on Instagram. Just type in Method from Madness, and I usually post things. It's been a little while because I've had some just life throwing curveballs at me, but we persevere, we push through, and I aim to have an EP coming out soon that is very much so based off of this cinematic, atmospheric type of approach thing. It's not going to be so synth heavy. There'll be that backdrop that I talk about that's created from Modular, but there's a lot of heavy piano that's leading the composition. And then after that, I already have in the works another EP that is way more electronic based, and you'll hear a lot more familiarity with, you know, there's a bass drum and there's the snare and there's elements to it. It's very electronic, but there's definitely material in the works, and it will be out soon. Very interested in having some visual accompaniment with it. Aiming to get into a camera or find somebody who would like to collaborate on something, and hope to have that out within 6 months, possibly sooner. But we roll with the punches.
Cool.
We'll see what happens.
Well, thanks again, man.
Absolutely.
Spencer, totally awesome. And thanks again for checking out this video. And hopefully we'll be doing some more videos. And maybe we had so much to talk about today. Maybe we'll do a part 2. So we'll see.
Heck yeah.
Thanks again, everybody. And if you get a chance, please like and subscribe to my channel. And thanks for supporting all the crazy things that we do as weirdo artists here in the Mid-Coast. So thanks again. Peace.